Good evening, all. I am quite honored to be here this evening. Before I start, though, I must thank everybody who I've met on the island. A lot of you have made me feel welcome and feel at home. As said earlier, I'm from the Bahamas, so I feel at home here. I've met a lot of people with the same last names as my family, as last names of people I know in the Bahamas, people who've been born in the Bahamas, moved back and forth to the Bahamas, so I've felt great to be here. But I'm very pleased to be speaking to you about not only the importance of protecting your historic records, but how you can use them to enhance your knowledge of your history and your culture. Kelley spoke quite in depth about what we are doing to digitize and to make access easier to your records. However, I want to show you two brief examples of how I've used documents in the Bahamas to really enhance the work that I do. So, the first one is a research project that I hold very dear to my heart, and it's actually very similar to the troubadour story. This is the story of the Peter Moel. The Peter Moel was the last slave ship to deposit a cargo of what was known as liberated Africans to the Bahamas, and this was in 1860. So this was quite late in the whole transatlantic slave trade story. But this story was just such an important part of Bahamian history. But if you read any history books on the Bahamas, you don't see it. It's just lost from history. And this is just something that we came upon by chance by actually digitizing historic records. We found a mission report where the missionaries started talking about the Congos that had just arrived in the Bahamas on a slave ship. And it talked about these Congos gathering to meet the other Congos from the ship and greet them with open arms and actually take them away from the indentured period. So these were African Congos already living in the Bahamas who refused to let the liberated Africans get put into indentured servitude. They just took them away. So this is something that we didn't know about. But then something that just really got key to this whole story. They talked about two children, and they mentioned how these children were sold to the slavers in Africa to pass on debts, and they actually gave the African names of the children. I won't pronounce it properly, but they call them Chante, and I won't even try to pronounce the girl's name. Next slide. But so we started looking in the baptism records of the various churches. Can we find Chance? And in our baptism records at the Anglican Church, Christ Church Cathedral, we found Chante, and he was baptized into an Anglican name of Chance Charles Harvey. And the other name up there I have is his sister's name, and she was baptized as Agnes. And this was just fascinating that we actually found these two individuals off of the slave ship. But what became more fascinating is we actually partnered with one of the Anglican churches, St. Agnes. This is an Anglican church in the Over the Hill community. It's been the Anglican church of the freed blacks, and it's still a very strong black Anglican church in Nassau today. And we started going through their baptism, births, deaths, marriage records. And we found Charles Harvey, and he married a lady named Rose. They stayed in St. Agnes. They had children at St. Agnes. We found all of their birth and baptism records at St. Agnes. We found Charles Harvey's death record and actually was able to find his grave based on these records because it said he was buried in Potter's Field. So then I went to Ministry of Works. They looked at their, because they controlled Potter's Field records. We found the plot, so we were actually able to find his grave. We continued along in the church records, and we continued to trace Charles' family. We found all of his children, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, because they all stayed in this church. And so one of the people we found was a Grandpa Charles Nichols, whose photo we actually was able to find from the family. And we found their marriage, and once again the children. But what became really fascinating with this whole story was they had about 10 or 11 children. Their children and their descendants are some very influential Bahamians, including permanent secretaries, pastors, doctors, lawyers, and so forth. And when we started speaking to them, none of them knew this story. None of them knew about their great-grandfather. None of them knew he had come in on this slave ship. And for the first time in the Bahamas, we were actually, through documents, able to trace a family, modern day family, to the transatlantic slave trade. And this is something that we always hear people talking about. I want to know where my family came from, what ship they came off of. And here with this family, we were able to do that. And I have to say, you all have the same records here. We have the church, as Kelley talked about, the baptism records, the marriage records, the death records, the birth records. They're all here, and you just need better access. It's just the whole family tree of this one individual. In this research now, we've started looking at other individuals from this ship. In 1861, just a whole bunch of African children who were baptized at the Anglican Church. And so we have assumed that these are more children from this slave ship, and we've begun tracing their descendants. And the family trees of people from this one slave ship has become quite lengthy. And then another project I just want to talk about is something that's a little more personal to me. I don't have any slides on that. We always hear people saying we want to know more about our family, where our families are from. And I have I would say a very interesting lineage. My dad's from England, where my grandfather has done our family tree to the 900s. But my mom is from the Bahamas. And I had always heard about this deep family heritage and this deep family history, but nobody had written it down. So I said, all right, well, I'm a historian and archaeologist. I should do it. So the first step I did, I went to the slave records, which Pat talked about. We actually have the original copies in the Bahamas for anybody who's ever there, but they're also online at the British Archives website. And so I looked for the family name Campbell. Couldn't find any Campbells. And I got really frustrated because I was like, all right, so if I can't find them in the slave records, where am I going to find them? So just one tip that somebody told me, if you ever want to do family research, write down as much as you could. So obviously I knew my own birth date. I wrote down my mother's birth date, her parents' birth dates, and then I started trying to find their parents' birth dates, which I couldn't find right away, so I had to go into the records. And I was able to trace my Bahamian family genesis, the Campbell side specifically, because we're working on a family reunion, to the first Campbell that came into the Bahamas in about 1840, and found out he was a man from Scotland, and he married a Bahamian woman whose family now I've been able to trace to the slave trade. And these records are just available out there for anybody who wants to take the time and wants to look at them. But these aren't just government records. These are personal family records. A lot of people have records in their homes that have been passed down from their grandparents, that were passed down to their grandparents. And this is why a National Archives is just so important, because this is all of your history. And the museum is doing a wonderful job. But I think if these records, once these records start coming in, it's going to become quite overwhelming. And that's all I have for you all, but if you have family histories, if you have family photos, bring those in. I'm sure the museum, I'm going to put some pressure on Pat here, will gladly help you with the storage and the preservation of them. And in the long term, some of them can be digitized and really accessible for everybody, because I know you had, I think it was Ike, yes, a number of years ago, and which really devastated the island. And just in the Bahamas last year, you all heard about Joaquin. And we lost a lot of records on our family islands. And these were records that I was actually in the process of trying to get to digitize. It was just a few months too late. So family records, if they can be stored in a safe, cool environment and digitized, then you have them forever.
Should we bring up the Wilbur Dam? Yeah, as a matter of fact, while we're on that, we were doing research in the Bahamas for some work in the Berry Islands. And we happened upon a gentleman's name by the name of Walter Vienne, who is a direct descendant of Stubbs, and he knew about Wade's Green. I contacted him. I spent about a year looking for him, and I finally found him. And he met with us in Orlando about 2 years ago. His family are made of pack rats, and I am so grateful his family are pack rats. they had original correspondence letters from the 1690s onward. And they have saved all of these documents, but he didn't know where to send them to. He's been looking for a home for these documents. And we've been negotiating with him to try to find a permanent home for them. But those records, we spent several days just preliminarily going through the records, and he was like, well, this doesn't mean anything. These are just receipts, and these are just letters we sent back and forth. It was much more than that. We were able to find out so much from things that he did not think carried much value, but once we started researching them, we did. We found a great deal of information about what was going on and what was happening with his family, and we found a great deal of information about the slaves, the families of the slaves that were there at Wayne's Green. And these were documents we had not been able to find anywhere else. So these older documents in particular, family Bibles, I've gotten more information from family Bibles than I could have ever dreamed of on some of these projects. People don't realize what they have, and so we encourage you to please overwork Pat. She's already overworked, but please, share what you have, because once it's gone, it takes one storm, it just takes one thing, it's gone. So definitely, please feel free to share what you have. And I'd also like to thank Pat and the museum staff for putting up with us while we have just taken over and driven everybody crazy here, I know, in this process. And Mike Temple for his never-ending patience, both in marriage and on this project. And Paul Diamond, who's taking care of all the photographs and videos and podcasts for this. Okay?
But I wanted to add to that also, and I'm going to put some pressure on your politicians also. Pressure your politicians. A national archive is just so vital towards preservation of your history, your culture, your heritage. I know I've spent a lot of time in our national archives, and I've even I've gone to the English National Archives, and the amount of documents they have there is just, it's unbelievable. But once again, these are documents on former British territories or current British territories. So you would be shocked how many historic records they have on the Turks and Caicos Islands. Just once again, speaking of the transatlantic slave trade, I found records in the British archives that spoke about a liberated African ship from Cuba that was sent into the Bahamas. And they listed the African names of people and then their baptized Christian names. And once again, that's a document I have never seen before, and can be really useful in people trying to trace their family lineages.